What's going on, guys? Joe Holka here, analyst at Fantasy Labs and the Action Network. Would definitely recommend you guys check out the tools and premium content that we have going on over there. Both links should be in the description below. Today I wanted to knock out a quick video for you guys, but if you know me, you probably are aware that I primarily play tournaments at the mid to high stakes for NFL, but I specifically target some of these smaller fields and roll out only a small amount of lineups each week that cover a pretty high percentage of my overall action. So the plan is to do a tournament review of some of those contests that I'm in every week. And today we're going to look specifically at the 1060 on DraftKings. Only 40 people in this one, but still 10K up top, so a decent amount of upside and a relatively flat payout structure. So I really like this tournament in general. Also going to fly through some of my content at the end of the tournament review. Just want to kind of stay accountable for some of the decisions that I'm making throughout the week, and also a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about throughout the week in the industry. So the game changer, let's just jump right into it. Just want to touch on a few lineups that I thought were especially interesting. The first one, Jeff El Jefe, was lucky enough to meet him at the DraftKings Week 1 party in Hoboken, New Jersey. Obviously, Jeff won the baseball live final this year. It was really nice meeting him, talking to him. His lineup was actually much higher most of the day in this tournament, kind of ran bad as far as injuries go. And then a couple of his kind of differentiating plays didn't end up working out. Obviously, super chalky week. I think Jeff, I don't want to speak for him, but I think he does like to go with a little bit more of a contrarian approach, which is kind of evident, at least in his lineup construction here. So he did have the Breeze to Kamara stack, but instead of adding in Michael Thomas, he went with Traquan Smith. Only one target for Traquan in this game, which was interesting. As soon as Cam Meredith was rolled out, I think some people pivoted over to Ted Ginn in some of the larger field tournaments and got some nice ownership there. Ginn, 68 yards and a TD, 6 targets. So ended up just getting a lot of the upside that he might have been going for with Traquan. But yeah, Cortland Sutton was the other one that really stood out to me in this lineup. He kind of caught some steam as the week went on as a pivot off of Cole, as well as some of the other cheaper wide receivers that people were probably considering on Sunday morning. So thought that was really sharp in a tournament like this where it's a really small field size, so you can kind of play a little bit more chalk, but you do kind of need a differentiator to make it to the top of the field. Obviously ran bad with Fournette. I thought Fournette was actually a pretty sharp play, especially getting him at 12.5% in this tournament with the hamstring injury. Obviously, that's rough. He was already pretty active in the passing game, as you can see in the little bit of action he got before he went down. That's something we saw in the preseason, him just ramping up his third down role a little bit. Hopefully he can get healthy and we can see a little bit more of that. Chargers defense at 10%. I was on the Chargers early in the week until the Bosa injury, seeing kind of how many passing attempts that we would get from Mahomes. I guess like this game in general from kind of a back and forth perspective. So saw a lot of really sharp people on Chargers D even after the Bosa injury. Obviously it didn't work out, but at 10%, I think he was fine for sure. Played Kamara and played Connor, so those were the guys that kind of carried this team, but ultimately some of these lower scores really hurt him where there was a decent amount of chalk. So let's go up a little bit. Let's take a look at CSU Ram 88. One of my coworkers at Fantasy Labs, of course. Really like his lineup in general. I don't think it was a cash lineup. It was probably Pete's League's lineup or some hedge version of that, obviously. But Breeze, Kamara, Michael Thomas, that's kind of the stack you needed to finish high in a lot of tournaments. Also had Emmanuel Sanders, of course. If you know anything about Pete, just check his Twitter feed to realize why he had Sanders in his lineup. But yeah, the interesting thing about Pete's lineup to me was his Tampa Bay stack. Obviously, he didn't have anyone but O.J. Howard, which was really an identifier in this tournament at 2.5%. Thought it was pretty sharp. Only 2 receptions for 54 yards, but obviously it wasn't a great matchup for some of the other weapons for Tampa Bay. It was kind of surprising to me in general that they moved the ball as well as they did, but getting kind of a piece of that action coming back, O.J. Howard was a cheap way to do that. Obviously, his price was extremely low, and he was kind of a nice pivot off of some of the other cheap tight end options as well that were somewhat popular. And then he went with James White over Connor, which I thought was interesting, but he did get him at reduced ownership in this tournament. 7.5% was really strong. Obviously, James White's a guy that's going to have a role in the passing game, a significant role for the Patriots. So really liked Pete's lineup in general. I thought he did a really good job on correlation, and then obviously had some guys that were unique as well. He was kind of on one of the only guys in this entire tournament on Devin Funchess, which gave him a little bit of leverage off of McCaffrey, obviously, who was pretty popular. So my guess is he was in between Melvin Gordon and McCaffrey in the flex, and then decided to kind of go with Gordon. But at the same time, if McCaffrey were to underperform, there was definitely a scenario that had Funchess doing really well in this matchup for sure. So I thought it was a sharp team from Pete for sure. Let's go all the way to the top now. A Raven, aka Daddy. Let's talk a little bit about Burkhead though. So Burkhead 27.5% owned in this tournament. Obviously, extremely chalky. Myself, I kind of stayed away from this backfield on most of my teams. I guess didn't really feel comfortable with some of the other value that was available. Obviously, had Kamara as well, but this was a really similar team. One of the ones that I was actually wrestling with on the morning as well, with the subtraction of Burkhead, and I had Connor kind of in there with a similar lineup construction. So the big choice for me was Jack Doyle versus Rob Gronkowski. And if you guys know me, I don't really play Rob Gronkowski, and usually when I do, it doesn't normally go well for me. So if I was looking at Jack Doyle, and that would have allowed me to get up to a guy like Michael Thomas, and then obviously Breeze, Kamara, Thomas, not surprising to see that. A lot of really similar plays. Ravens defense at 17.5% in this tournament was really interesting. 17 points for them. They were the clear defense pretty much the entire week for a lot of people. So it was not that surprising to see it be lower owned in this tournament, because there's obviously a lot of really sharp people that were probably trying to leverage the field. But at 17.5%, I really like the value that A Raven got here on them. He also went with Bruce Ellington, another pivot off of one of those wide receivers. Obviously, Fuller was ruled out pretty late, so Bruce Ellington in that role was going to see a decent amount of targets, with New England probably trying to lock down Hopkins. 10% thought that was a decent play. A Raven, congrats on the 10K. Let's go ahead and look at my team now. It was pretty similar, honestly. Fortunate enough to take third place in this one for 6K. Really caught some breaks on this one, to be completely honest. So had Connor, had Kamara, had Sanders. Those were like the first three guys into most of my lineups for sure. Mentioned that decided to go with Rob Gronkowski in this game. Not something I normally do, but a week like this where we just had all the salary in the world made a lot of sense to me. I actually thought McCaffrey would be higher owned in this tournament specifically than Melvin Gordon. So thought that Melvin Gordon was a very similar play, but I was really comfortable. I like this game in general a little bit more than the Dallas game, so that's how I made it to Gordon. Was really ecstatic, honestly, to open it up and see Ravens D at 17.5%. I think there's an argument to be said for some of these tournaments where people will try to be a little bit too contrarian for just 40 people. I don't think you really have to do that. I think the best way to kind of leverage the field in some of these is to have a unique stack or unique correlation play. Basically a small pivot off of what a cash lineup would be, what you think is optimal. So the way I did that was with Deshaun Watson to Bruce Ellington. If I was to make a cash lineup, I probably would have landed on Breeze in this spot, but decided to go a little bit different. And since I did like Bruce Ellington quite a bit, I don't know if he had the most upside, but I did really like his floor. And I think going for floor in these small field tournaments is fine, especially at some of your cheaper plays. So went with Deshaun Watson to Bruce Ellington since I knew I was playing Gronk, so bringing it back with him. Thought that was fine. Danny Amendola is another one. Talked about him. One of my articles this week. I just thought that he was going to be on the field a ton. Probably should have got off him when it was evident that there was going to be a little bit more of a rotation there. Obviously not the Miami receiver you needed. Kenny Stills was the guy that ended up having the blow-up game there, but did think Danny Amendola was pretty strong given his price. At 4,200, he was a little bit more expensive than Cole, so should give you a little bit more different kind of lineup construction than some of those guys. But thought he was a really safe play. Got a decent amount of targets in this game, but obviously, like I said, not the Miami guy that you needed. So kind of got bailed out with this Deshaun Watson and Bruce Ellington stack. They scored a touchdown extremely late. I was looking pretty grim as far as placing high in this tournament, even with a lot of chalk plays that did extremely well. So kind of got bailed out there. I think that looking back, maybe I should have been a little bit more concerned after Fuller was ruled out that his weapons just weren't going to give him the upside that he normally had. And then obviously New England wasn't going to let him do what he did last year. So wasn't really on Watson most of the week. That was just kind of what I thought was a strong pivot off of Breeze in a tournament of this size. But going back to that, if I really wanted to get correlation, probably still could have played Ellington as more of a one-off play or just a little bit of a game stack with Gronkowski, but would have been totally fine just to get Breeze in there and have Kamara as well in that game. So talk a little bit more about that when I go over my stacking piece. But yeah, so this was the game changer. Think it's a really good tournament in general. It's nice to get off to a decent start. Definitely caught some breaks along the way with the Watson stack in particular. Maybe Amendola wasn't a great play just in general because his floor was there, but maybe he didn't have the highest ceiling. But like I said, you don't need a massive score to take down a tournament of 40 people for the most part. So Raven, congrats for taking it down. Pretty decent score there. Paid out the top 8, I believe. So yeah, you needed a score of just over 200 to cash this one. Definitely feel fortunate to have done that early on in the season. So let's check out some of the content, see what I did right, what I did wrong, obviously. First, DraftKings playbook. Did the defense article, got picked up over there this week, so that was really cool. In general, the 2 defenses at the top that were the high-priced defenses, Baltimore, Jacksonville, they both got there. Not much really needs to be said about Baltimore against Peterman. I just think that was pretty much the nut spot for most of the week. If people got off that, I understand it for sure, since there's so much variance at defense in general. And actually did kind of need some of the salary to get up to some of the mid-range wide receivers. So Jacksonville, more of an upside play, talked about that. Eli's actually been decent at limiting turnovers lately. So that ended up working out. So as far as the cheap end, I really like the New England Patriots, like almost the entire week at 2,400. Just seemed really underpriced. Just thought that there was definitely a clear path to Watson, who takes sacks. Only Tyrod and Sam Bradford have taken more percentage of sacks over the last year. So really like the line for the Patriots as far as pressure goes, 10th in adjusted sack rate, and the Texans' offensive line is absolutely just in shambles. So I thought there was a good chance that they would get some pressure, which turns out they did. Pittsburgh was another one that I was looking at as far as targeting sacks. Tyrod takes a decent amount of sacks. Pittsburgh's another team that pressures. There's kind of this weird salary range for the Steelers in this game. We did have them projected relatively high for sacks in our models as well. So part of the reason I like them. New Orleans Saints at 3,600. I thought originally this was a pretty strong pivot off of the Ravens. I expected them to play a lot better, frankly, against Tampa Bay. I think there's part of us that maybe that's part of the reason I didn't end up on the game stack. But think that they were fine. Obviously, it didn't really work out for them because this game just went absolutely nuts, but not really scared of points in general. I'm more or less looking for turnovers. I'm looking for sacks, looking for interceptions. So pass attempts are always a good thing for defense for the most part, at least give you a few more opportunities to create those turnovers. So LA Chargers, this is an article that comes out on Wednesdays, so I didn't have the Bosa news here, but obviously Pete and Jeff both had the Chargers in their 1K team, so still think that they were fine at 2,800, kind of in this range. I was by the end of the week I was more on Cincinnati against Indy, kind of in this price range. I think they were 2,700, but I think the Chargers were fine. Let's jump over to stacks. Start going through this a little bit quicker. This is already getting a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. Phillip Rivers, Keenan Allen. This is more of a play just because I think that the Kansas City defense is extremely overrated, but obviously they kind of defend the short area of the field extremely well. At least that's what they try to do. So this is more kind of betting on talent with Allen. He had a great game, obviously, so this one worked out. James Conner, basically the first guy in your lineup. It's really hard to fade a Pittsburgh running back at 4,500 just because we have such a large sample size of them just going right into giving him the entire role. So at 4,500, a guy that we know that's going to get all the touches basically and is going to be active in the passing game with a large spread as well, a team that we expected to be ahead. Game script was going to be good. Couldn't really fade James Conner. It's going to be even more of a decision this week. I think his price went up to 6,700, so we'll see if DraftKings got aggressive enough in moving him up. Talked about the Pittsburgh D already. So this stack, quarterback, wide receiver, opposing wide receiver, went Bortles, Cole, and brought it back with Beckham. This is probably the worst one I feel like in this article. Keelan Cole is a guy that I was actively trying to get off of on Sunday morning just because I thought he was going to be extremely popular and in a game that maybe the volume wouldn't be great for the passing game. And we weren't really sure what the role was going to be for some of these Jacksonville wide receivers. I think there was definitely an argument for going after some of the other guys at much lower ownership. Beckham against Jacksonville is not something I was super interested in, but a guy with this kind of talent is someone that I wasn't really too surprised that he had a really good game. Didn't kill you if you didn't have ODB in tournaments. More or less, what got me off of it is this is a Thursday article. By the time Sunday came around, I guess heard so many people talking about how he might be a sharp play, but he ended up like, let's go to the ownership dashboard quickly and look and see what his ownership was. Obviously, this is our ownership dashboard at Fantasy Labs. We can see the ownership at different stakes. So looking down, let's see what he ended up at in the Millionaire Maker. Let's go search. So he was 6% in the Millionaire Maker, pretty much across the board. So if he was going to be like the leverage play of the slate, I would have liked to have seen him a little bit lower than 6%. Obviously, it's still a pretty great value for a guy like Beckham, but just kind of the mindset with this stack is that he'd be a little bit lower than that. So yeah, I think that this was fine. Probably looking back on it, wasn't a ton of upside from Bortles to Cole from the start. So probably would have done that one a little bit differently. The game stack that I wrote up: Drew Brees, Kamara, Michael Thomas, and Mike Evans. Mike Evans obviously didn't have a great matchup, but the one thing I did want to talk about was the idea of playing Brees and Kamara together is a little different than playing Cam Newton to Christian McCaffrey, because Cam Newton is obviously going to kind of cannibalize the rushing upside for a guy like McCaffrey at the goal line. We did see that as Cam runs one in. But Brees normally isn't going to do that unless he's like right at the goal line, does a goal line sneak. The correlation with a guy like Brees and Kamara is they're always a threat to catch or have obviously a receiving and passing touchdown. I think the correlation for a guy like that makes a lot more sense in tournaments than Cam Newton to McCaffrey, something like that. Bringing back with Mike Evans was what I thought. I mean, obviously doesn't feel great because of the matchup, but he still got there. So I think that this was a solid game stack. My concerns in general was just that Tampa Bay just wasn't going to be able to keep up as far as points. But wrote up the stack, ended up not playing it. So yeah, standard there. Let's go to leverage plays. This is going to be an article that comes out on Fridays. It's going to be a little bit different. Wrote up 10 leverage plays this week. I think we're going to do things a little different this coming week. LaShawn McCoy was one of our top leverage score players and models at the running back position, with all these other guys locked into great spots at similar salaries. McCoy and the Bills, obviously, terrible game script, but I thought there was a chance that he could be involved a little bit more in the passing game than he was. Obviously, this is the one that didn't really work out. But yeah, rostering a guy as a 7.5 road underdog, not ideal, but you would have in theory gained a decent amount of ownership leverage at the 6K range instead of some of the other guys that maybe were a little bit more expensive, like McCaffrey or even Gordon. Talked about Odell Beckham. He was another leverage play wrote up. Travis Kelce definitely didn't get there, but just from kind of a game theory perspective, people are playing Gronk. Not a lot of people are going to pay for Kelce, who's a little bit cheaper, but in theory, like, it still makes a decent amount of sense to go after a guy like this at low ownership in a game that we expect to be high paced, and we expected them to be behind, frankly, because their defense just isn't very good. So might not be a bad spot to go back to Kelce next week with just everyone's going to want to play Tyreek Hill after the game that he had, obviously. So Danny Amendola, talked about him. I thought he was a decent leverage option off of Cole. The Saints was more of like my early week pivot off of Baltimore. Obviously, that could have gone a lot better. Kirk Cousins, I really like Cousins in general, just because his stacking options are just so obvious. Diggs, Thielen, those are going to be guys that are heavily involved, obviously, the entire year. And Rudolph, really, even though he got a touchdown, never really considered him. Was a really bad spot. If he wouldn't have had that touchdown, he just wasn't involved at all. So Kirk Cousins, in a game that was expected to have a lot of offensive plays for the Vikings, I think he was fine. He was probably a little bit too expensive, honestly. He's in the kind of that same range as Breeze and Deshaun. Definitely thought both those guys were stronger than Cousins in general, just because we expected the Vikings to be ahead, and maybe the game script wouldn't have been there the entire game. The main issue I had with the game stack with the Vikings and the San Francisco 49ers is that I just didn't think that San Francisco had a great stacking option to bring it back with. There was an argument for Goodwin, obviously, but he was going to see Rhodes. Rhodes is banged up. Yeah, so I mean, he probably would have been the guy, but then he ends up going down with an injury. So, but yeah, that was the basis for Cousins. Dede, just straight leverage off of Cole. I think that was fine. Case Keenum, really liked Case Keenum in general. Thought he was a really good play against this defense for Seattle that people for some reason think is good. I guess DraftKings will probably adjust that in the future, but they kind of made a mistake, obviously. More with Sanders than Keenum, honestly. Didn't talk a lot about Sanders, but he's one of the first guys in my lineup for a lot of reasons. Case Keenum likes to target the slot, but just he was just massively overpriced for the role that he was going to have, and then obviously the chemistry that these guys have already shown throughout the preseason and all the chatter through practice and such. So John Brown, he was another wide receiver pivot that I liked. I liked this game in general for pace, so I thought that if there was one guy that was going to kind of make a play on a big kind of a downfield play, it was probably going to be John Brown just because of how well he's played in the preseason, and there's just been a lot of talk about him and Joe Flacco. Their skill sets really match up well. Like Flacco can throw the deep ball, and John Brown obviously has big playability. So yeah, I thought John Brown was a really strong pivot at the 3,700 range, and that's really what we were looking for on the slate, was how are we going to pivot off of Cole on Sunday morning, and John Brown turned out to be a decent leverage option there. Wrote up Duke Johnson. This was the play that I actually ended up going kind of on my own towards the other running back in this situation. Obviously, Carlos Hyde was going to see the kind of early down roll, but I expected him to see a few more passes as well. Really thought Carlos Hyde was a decent pivot off of Connor if you really wanted to go there, but I didn't really do that on my teams, like I said. But I think that he was probably the strongest like game theory type play off of Connor at the same price point. Probably wouldn't have made it to Duke. Kind of like I said, got on Carlos Hyde, but it was same kind of idea. They were going to be behind. Hopefully, would just see some targets when the Browns were trying to come back, and Tyrod throws to his running backs a ton. Only Breeze had thrown to more to his running back over the past year. So that was the thought process there. Props are going to be over on the Action Network, doing a Thursday Night Football, doing a Sunday and also a Monday Night Football props article. So Thursday Night Football, Ajayi had him over 9.5 receiving yards. He actually didn't even get a catch. Matchup was really good in theory, so I think the process was okay there. Hopefully he does get a little bit more involved in the passing game. That would be nice to see. Calvin Ridley had him under 3 receptions. That one obviously hit. Yeah, he just didn't really. I didn't really like the role going into it, just because he was going to split snaps with Justin Hardy. He actually saw 64% of the snaps, which is third highest, but only 2 targets and not even a reception in this game. So 1 for 1 on Thursday. Sunday Night Football was a little bit better, but we do have to start with Rashard Higgins. Rashard Higgins, obviously, just that one play. He had 1 catch, and that was enough to bury this prop. 1 reception for 38 yards, kind of when the Browns were coming back in that game. So that was rough. Deshaun Watson over 22.5 rushing yards. Thought that was a lock. He got to 40 on 8 carries. Really nice to see him still moving relatively well after that injury. That's something that we needed to be watching for earlier in the year. And then Eckler just smashed his prop. He actually ended up with 39 yards on the ground on 5 rush attempts and 87 yards through the air on 5 receptions. So that one really worked out well. Mentioned how much I liked Case Keenum. 1.5 touchdowns seemed a little low against this Seattle defense. So he smashed his prop, 3 touchdowns, also through 3 interceptions in this game. So I thought that was pretty interesting to see. Not a guy that really threw many interceptions the entire year last year. So that'll be something to monitor. Tariq Cohen, so over 3 receptions, got a push out of this one. Turns out Jordan Howard is actually capable of catching balls now. Who knew? He got LASIK in the offseason apparently, so maybe that was actually huge for him. But it's just the role. They're willing to give him targets. 5 balls go his way, caught all 5, which is something that we haven't really seen that kind of efficiency, I guess, from Jordan Howard. So that's interesting. Anyways, overall, massively chalky week. Definitely don't think things are always going to go this smoothly, but nice to kind of get off to decent start here. Definitely want to keep these videos a little shorter in the future, but that's pretty much it. Give me a follow on Twitter. I'm at Joe Holka. Again, be sure to check out Fantasy Labs and the Action Network. Both links to our different subscription levels are in the description. No affiliates or anything like that. Just truly think we have some of the best tools out there for players that are serious about DFS and sports betting. Check out our app as well. I honestly deleted like all the things I was using to track sports off my phone and just use the Action Network app now, just because I think it's that good. So definitely check that out. Would love to do more of these shows. It's just going to be an issue with time. Sometimes it's easy to jump on and do quick 15-minute videos like this. Want to do some live shows Sunday morning. Might be doing even like some pivots and late swap ones some weeks before the 3 o'clock games start. But yeah, it was nice to meet everyone in Hoboken at the DK party this week. Really great time meeting a lot of those people for the first time. So good luck everyone in week 2, and all right, good talk. See you guys out there.